right, let's get this started. Right after this talk, it's just gonna steamroll right into you like that? Plug into Jaleel's part 2. But before that, Tricks of the Trade. Last year, Tricks of the Trade was the #1 rated talk of the first 2 days of the Bootcamp Summit. Everything. It was great. It was amazing. Alex did a great job setting it up. The baton was passed this year to Kristjan, and he assembled a new group of people to just rapid fire drop a ton of knowledge and process into your brain. So I'm going to get out of the way and let them do what they do. Give it up for the Tricks of the Trade.
Oh my God. Okay. All right. Are you ready? Okay. Hi everyone, welcome to the second edition of Tricks of the Trade. My name's Kristjan Zadziuk and I'm an animation director for Ubisoft. And I'm going to be your host today. I've been lucky enough to work on various different studios on games such as Assassin's Creed, Splinter Cell and Watch Dogs 2, but basically I love gameplay animation, which is why we're all here, right? Haven't got time for that. Sat up here with me is an amazing, diverse panel of industry talent with over 70 years of combined animation experience. They're still hungry to learn and eager to share their tips and tricks with you. But first, a quick thank you. You all clearly appreciated the fantastic content in last year's Tricks of the Trade, make it the #1 animation talk at GDC. But why? Well, it's full of bite-sized pieces of animation gold, tips from industry veterans that you could take and immediately apply to your work as soon as you leave this hall. And of course, the presenters were pretty great as well. Yeah. But of course, so this year, we're returning with even more in 30 minutes of knowledge sharing that will hopefully help you level up your animation and industry skill. Okay, the only way we're going to develop as an industry is if we share and we pay it forward. These tips have helped us speed up our daily workflow that we've learned from our peers. And so in the interest of sharing, we hope this encourages you to share with us too. So the format is pretty simple. 6 panelists, 3 tips each, 5 minutes apiece, which means we're going to be going pretty fast. So don't worry about taking notes. Everything's going to be on the GDC Vault. So buckle up and enjoy. First up is going to be Mariel. This is the Animation Bootcamp. Tricks of the Trade. Let's get started.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm back. I'm up here again. So, hi, I'm Muriel. I'm lead animator and art director for Lab Zero Games. We made a game called Skullgirls, and now we're making a game called Indivisible. My experience in game animation has been entirely in 2D, but I think my tips today can help all kinds of animators, hopefully. So, since we're starting, this might be an obvious one, but we could start with something basic. This is a question I've gotten before, so I figure we can kind of cover it. So when I start animating a new game character, the first thing I start with isn't a run, an attack, or a jump, or anything like that. It's the idle pose. This is the root of all your animations. This is where they start and end. What should your idle pose look like, though? You can use the opportunity to get some personality in there, but also you should keep in mind how the idle will connect to the rest of the character's animations. For example, for our archer, Zebe here, we needed to make sure his moves matched the way he was holding the bow and arrow in his idle. A lot of the concepts had him switching hands, so we needed to make sure they all lined up. Did it switch? Okay. Also important is to remember not just the idle animation itself, but the transition to and from your idles. Game animations are actually interrupting each other all the time because different things are happening, so making sure that you return to that same base is going to help your animation feel more seamless as they transition. And especially in 2D, it's important to remember that the idle itself is also a motion. I think what can end up happening if you don't pay attention is that you treat the idle as a single pose and animate as if you're easing into that single pose. But since the idle itself is a motion, you need to treat the start and ends of all the animations connecting to it as a continuous motion. So you need to be aware of where you're coming from and where you're going to as you animate moves stemming from the idle. So, tip number 2. At our studio, we've gone from making a fighting game to a platforming RPG. And they're both like games viewed from the side. They kind of look the same. So that means we can animate them the same, right? But actually, a key thing changed between our 2 games: how far away the camera was. In Skullgirls, our fighting game, the characters are large on screen because they essentially are the entire game. Subtle touches came across in the animations because they were just so big. And then we started to animate our second game, Indivisible, which is a platforming RPG. And we actually quickly realized that we couldn't approach it in exactly the same way. We zoomed out the camera, and a lot of the detail we had put into Skullgirls characters just became noise when viewed from the zoom in Indivisible. So we had to simplify everything. Our animations, our characters, we just kind of had to relook at what we were doing. Subtle animations had to be exaggerated a lot more just so you could actually see them on the screen. And this doesn't just apply to us. What kind of game are you making? Are you viewing your characters from the side, the top down? Is it first person? If you're working on something like League of Legends or Diablo, where your animations are viewed from above, you might not see expressions that you want to animate on the character. You even need to approach your key poses differently because your silhouette reads differently from the top. If you're working on a first-person game and you can run right up to an NPC or a monster, you might want to put facial animations or subtle idols in there to create better immersion in that world. Or alternatively, how often are you even going to see the close-ups of the monsters you're destroying? Do you even need to see that detail if you're always shooting them from 500 feet away? It all depends on what you're making and how you can get your animation to best serve how the player is going to be looking at it. Oops, I went too far. Okay, so try animating something as simple as turning around in place. Do you just instinctively know where your feet go and what they do? Do you know where your shoulders and hips are? Do you know where your head's looking? Are your eyes open? Are they closed? If you know all this, that's kind of amazing because I don't know. So whenever you can, you need to act things out. You need to get up out of your chair, I know it's hard, and you need to act out the motion you're trying to make. It helps so much to really feel the motion you're trying to animate in your own body. Act out what you're trying to do and feel where you're putting your weight, which is so, so important in animation. And you can also record yourself or your friends or take photos of poses like this stupid one of me here. For example, for this move in particular, we had an idea of the poses we wanted to hit, but figuring out how they connected was difficult. And the solution was just to get up and try it ourselves, like you see here. It's things like this that maybe you could figure out if you just kind of sat at your desk and thought about it for a long time. But even then, I still don't think you'd arrive at a convincing result. You really need to feel and understand the subtleties of the motion you're trying to recreate on screen, and to do that, you have to get up out of your chair and just do it. And that's it for me. Next, we have Zach.
Sorry, I have to make this slightly bigger because I'm going blind. Hello, I'm Zach Lowery. I'm a senior animator and designer at Boss Key Productions, working on the competitive first-person shooter Lawbreakers. So I've been deemed the guy that's going to talk about first-person tips, and having me follow Matt Boehm today is kind of cruel, but I'm going to do my best and probably echo some of the stuff that he talked about. So before joining Boss Key, I was at Volition for 10 years, and I worked on the entirety of the Saints Row franchise, and that was a third-person open-world game. So for the last 2 years, I've been working on the majority of first-person stuff, and today I want to focus my tips on things that can help people transitioning from third-person to first-person, because you definitely have to approach this from a different perspective. No? No laughs. All right. It's... Yeah, you get it now. All right, so third-person animation setup. We've all animated typical third-person setup. The root drives the center of mass, the weapon is constrained to the hand, and the hand drives the weapon. In third person, you're animating the character first, and the weapon is secondary. I'm off already. You're animating the character first, and the weapon is secondary. Damn it, sorry. Okay. So, but when you set this up in first person, you get this interesting center of mass of the weapon is off screen. So if you're trying to do like, subtle movements or bounces and things like that, your center of mass is off screen. So it throws off your rotations, and you start having to like do a lot of counter animation to get it to rotate from the correct standpoint. So Matt kind of touched on some of this. What you want to do in first person is let the weapon drive. So in a typical first-person setup, what I would recommend is the weapon as the character. Treat it that way. It's what you're going to see on screen. The hands, set them to weapon space. So when I do my animation, I'm animating from the weapon center of mass, and I can set that up to be where I want it relative to the screen. So that way when I start doing subtle motions, like the one that I showed earlier, you can see that my center of mass is on the screen, and I'm not fighting this as I'm doing like settles and things like that. So when I show these things side by side, you can see that you get a nice rotation point from the screen. And then you can play around with this, and you can set up your weapons to be however you want, but you're not getting this odd rotation from the hand. And your rotations start off clean, and you don't have your hand angled at some weird thing, and that's your starting pose. It may seem like a dumb moment, but it's pretty helpful. So my second one, I came across this quote from J.K. Ricci. Your job as an animator is to present things clearly as possible for the audience so that nothing gets in the way of their entertainment. It might look very visually interesting to have some fancy camera move while the character is dashing down a hallway towards impending doom, but if it loses the audience, the shot will be a failure. So keep it simple and keep it clear. It will still look cool. As I read this, it really hit home to me about first person because, as Matt pointed out, we have staging, which is something that's kind of rare in game animation. We know where the camera is and we can do our performance to that. But we need to make sure that we're not making the audience sick or that we're not doing something that distracts from what's actually happening. So keep it simple, keep it clear. You don't want that. Do not over-design the action. Don't rush the key information. And do not put style ahead of readability. It's something that's really difficult to do. When you first jump into first person, all you want to do is do the coolest thing possible, and you've got this gun, and you're going to spin it and flip it. But if you're doing these complex actions and people can't follow what's happening, you're going to lose out on the audience very quickly. But what you do want to do is simplify the action into what I call key beats. Use holds for understanding. It typically takes 4 to 6 frames for the viewer to absorb information. And then apply style to the beats. And what I mean by style is your character or the weapon's personality. And then clarity is king. It's the most important thing. So this is an animation that I did for this like kind of futuristic gunslinger guy. And I think it kind of represents everything that I was talking about. You can see the chamber opening when the gun's energy core depletes. The gun winds up to repower the core, and then the chamber closes with a snap. So what I did is I identified these key beats, and then with it being this idea of a futuristic gunslinger and like this techno revolver, I applied the style to those beats. So instead of the core just opening up and then going back in, he spins it around, flips it, kind of snaps it back in. And then lastly, layers are for details. So this is a simple tip that our lead animator at Boss-Key shared with me when I first came on board. And I was just getting started in first person. And honestly, I think it applies to first person, third person, or just animation in general. It's a simple no-brainer, but sometimes you gloss over things like this. But use your layers for the details, and the details are what brings your animations to life. So this is an example of a gun that I designed. I worked with a concept artist. Same character, he's got 2 guns, and he's got to reload them independently because while this one's reloading, he can shoot, so he can't use both of his hands. So we had to design these guns to be reloaded without touching them with another hand. So in this animation, it's super simple. The gun just lifts up, it holds it there so that you can see that it's got a 3D printer that's printing a new ammo brick so that it can continue shooting. I really dig this, I think it's awesome, but as far as animation goes, it's really simple. So what I do is, I don't have as many layers as Matt, but this is a super simplified example. So what I use my base layer for is for my foundational movement, on my overall timing, the big motions, and the base of the idea and getting that across. I go through that, I get that in, I put it in game, because as you've probably heard today, get it in game as soon as possible. Get it in game, start getting feedback. But going back to the animation, it's super simple, But what brought that to life was the details, how the gun shakes when the ammo prints. And I knew there was going to be a lot of iteration on getting that to feel right. Does it need to feel heavy? Does it need to feel like it's rapidly printing? I was going to play around with it a lot. So then that's my basic, non-exciting curves for my big motion, but it gets the job done. And then I come in with my detail layer, and I add in these tiny curves that show, how fast it shakes or whatever. But what this allows me to do is keep my big curves big and my little curves little, and then I can go in there and I can easily tweak like how it's shaking or rocking and things like that. And I can play around with the overall weight and feel of the gun without upsetting the timing and things like that. So those are my 3 tips. They're pretty simple, but when you start getting into first person, if you've never done it before, it can be really just overwhelming at times because, as Matt was showing, and I learned very quickly, we're stretching and cheating things all over the place, but as an animator that's working in third person, like you don't even know that you can do that. And then when people are like, oh no, break the arm, snap the elbow, like do whatever you want, like it becomes really freeing that I don't have to worry about, 2/3 of the body. Yeah, that's it. And I'm gonna pass it off to Young.
What's up, guys? All right, so I'm Young Vo, animation lead for Sparky Pants, not Spanky Pants. Currently working on Drop Zone. Check it out, great game. All right, first tip. Don't start your hit reacts from the idle. I learned this when I was working on Reckoning. So we all know that video game is different from film. Video games is linear. Film is linear. Video game is more like a jigsaw puzzle. Pieces, all the animations have to fit within each other, right? They have to connect. Now, hit reacts are a little unique. That hit reacts they need to feel satisfying and responsive, right? And most new animators will automatically animate the hit react starting from idle to the hit frame to recovery, settle, back into idle again. That's how they think they should animate it. But when you do that, the result is kind of sluggish. It feels kind of slow, right? So, as you can see here, like the animation right there, it's not the fault of the attack that makes it feel slow. Because you look, the attack feels like it's not really making contact. It feels a little sluggish, right? But if we start the animation for the attack later at the recovery pose, instantly the player will see like the attack, visually the attack is going to be, the react will be much bigger. The pose is bigger if you start from the recovery pose. So it's going to be a much clearer read, quick and clear. So as you can see there, same attack, but the reaction started later, so it feels bigger. The impact is huge. The bigger you push the reaction pose or the recovery pose, the bigger the action. The bigger the attack will feel. And I always tell people, push this pose as big as you can, because if you want it to be impactful, make it big, right? That's tip number 1. You're welcome. Tip number 2. So this is a typical take that we see all animators do. We have an anticipation, we have an overshoot, and then an action, right? Perfectly normal. The problem is, majority of the time when you do this, you don't know why the character is doing it, right? This is what we normally see in games. Character stands around, player comes in, and he just freaks out. Why are you here? Right? You don't know why he's freaking out. So what I tell young animators is now this all depends. This is mainly for NPCs, and it depends on gameplay, of course. But if you add a decision pose, a recognition pose, a pose where basically tells the viewer why he's reacting this way. A teacher of mine at Cal Arts told me that acting is reaction, is not action. So how your character reacts to something tells you who they are. Now this is very subtle, and depending on gameplay, you can spend more time in the decision pose, give it more character. This is where you want to add personality and subtext to your character before the anticipation. People always ask me, how do I give it more personality character? You do it before the anticipation. You do it before he actually does something. All right. Oh, sorry, you're welcome. Tip number 3. Use your hand as reference. Now, I learned this the hard way. When you get a weird, crazy creature and you spend all this time trying to find the perfect reference, you're like, I need to find an animal with 20 tentacles, a large mouth, 8 horns. And it's like, can't find that. That just doesn't exist. And if you guys seen that, run away. So use your hand as reference. And how you want to use your hand as reference is basically you want to figure out the center of gravity. You want to figure out the weight. You want to figure out how it's going to be moving, how the weight is being pushed, pulled, how the weight is going to shift, how it's going to settle. Once you figure that out as animators, the body mechanics just follows, right? Because that's the core of animation. If we figure out the timing and spacing, we can figure out the rest. And I use my hands just to block things out a lot, so I can just get it out of there. So I figure that out quick, and then I can just block out the animation. All right, this is an animation I did for Drop Zone, and I couldn't find reference for this guy, so yeah. And yes, those hands are mine. You're welcome. I'm gonna hand it off to John.
All right, I'm going to try to go pretty quickly here, so bear with me. My name is Paul Rhinemiller. I am the lead cinematics animator at Vicarious Visions, currently working on Insane Trilogy and Destiny. So my first tip is a technique I learned from a supervisor of mine at Rhythm and Hughes Studios, Tim Pixon, and it's called swing sets. So I'm going to go and try to do a condensed version of this process here, so bear with me, and if you have any questions about it, hit me up later. This was a traditional technique that they used in television shows back in the day where they had a limited number of mouth shapes. Basic set of 12 shapes here helps you quickly create organic lip sync without having to do a ton of cleanup at the end. You can use more or less than 12, but the basic idea is to start with 12. It's important to note here that these are not phonemes. So they're not individual shapes that are crafted and then plugged in. These shapes are built together so they move in and out of each other organically. They feel like they're swinging from one shape to the next. And with many games not having blend shapes and a ton of bones in the face, this process, once it's set up, can help save a ton of time and also keep consistency among your animation team. So if you look at it, the flow of the mouth from the M to the UR follows the natural arc of the jaw. And as the mouth opens, the jaw goes back and down and back, and as it closes, it goes up and in.
But now's not the time to get cocky. But now's not the time to get cocky.
Sorry, I know that's loud.
But now's not the time to get cocky.
Thank you. So the basic idea here is to listen to your dialogue clip, find out where your swing set shapes will be. When writing it down, and looking at my chart, those are the shapes that I came up with here.
But now's not the time.
And these can vary as well and combine T and L, but again, this is a great starting point. So now using my pre-built shapes, go based off of the breakdown sheet that you guys just saw. I take these in and I put them in for blocking. It took me a little bit less than 5 minutes. Now this is obviously a smaller clip, and you can start to see the value of this if you get a much larger dialogue clip. To break this down just a little bit more here, a quick example would be that I have the O in 2, and it goes directly into the TK into get. So I look at the chart and I say, I need a breakdown in between here because these shapes are too far apart from each other, so I have to have a breakdown to make that smooth transition. I look at this way here, and
I'm not getting it here because the way that the jaw is moving, it's going in or up and in. And so then I take a look over here. This is going to get the drop in the jaw that I think that I want. So I'm going to go with the eye here.
But now's not the time to get cocky. But now's
Super
not the
simple,
time
but again,
to
you
get
can
cocky.
see if this was a much
Now's
larger
not the
dialogue and you're
time to
plopping
get
in your
cocky.
shapes,
Now's
how much it could actually help. So with and without, I don't have the audio here. Another great thing about this technique here is that the curves tend to flow really nicely in your graph editor, and potential issues are really easy to identify. Tip number 2, other great, here we go. Keep your shapes simple. You can communicate wonders with just a few shapes. Many times characters will only have a few shapes that they move through. Skinner here in Ratatouille really only has 3 shapes that he moves through, especially when you pay attention to the corners of the mouth. He works within those shapes as he talks throughout the film. Simplify your shapes. You don't want to constantly be moving to extremes with your lip sync. It should be motivated by an accent or by an expression change. Yep. And this is a great example here with the woman. Even though you can't hear her, she stays in a certain range, and it's not until she accents that her mouth actually goes outside of that range. The corners of the mouth are the first place that I usually can see it. So if you move through too many shapes and constantly go in and out, it'll look too busy and overcomplicated. So think of it like you do your performance. You want a rhythm and a flow to your performance, and your lip sync is just one layer of that performance, so treat it like that. Track the arcs of the mouth. This example from Leica here has a really great flow to the corners of the mouth as they go in prototype here, and it adds a great level of appeal to your lip sync. And last tip is change the shape of your blinks on its way up to help it feel a little bit more fleshed out. This is a blink with the lids very linear, closed and open. You can see here on the way down and up, very linear. With just a small adjustment, lots of times I start with the center of the lid and I drag that just a little bit. You can play with that based on the size of your character. With wider, obviously, eyes or narrower eyes, you may have to increase that drag a little bit. Here you can see it with just that subtle change. It gives the eye region a bit more fleshed out feeling. It can create a peel effect like you do with your lip sync. It's a great thing to think about in polish, and obviously you're seeing this very close up, so as your characters get a bit farther away from camera, it can start to look better on screen. And next up is Ellie.
Hi, my name is Almudena Soria, and I'm lead animator at Naughty Dog. Been making games since 2001. So my first tip is about how to make more efficient, be more efficient with debugging and problem-solving animations in the game. So programmers are often really busy people. So before coming to them with a problem, we should make sure we have checked that nothing is obviously wrong with our animations. Check that your frame ranges are correct, that you're using the right skeleton, and that the Maya file exists. All the obvious things that could be wrong in your animation pipeline. So once you check all your assets, would you go and look for help? Not yet. So don't present problems, offer solutions. It's often more time-consuming, often presenting a problem with a no solution. But to offer solutions, you need to understand how things work. So here are just a few things you can do to narrow problems down. Know what is getting exported into the game. Not always what you see in Maya is what you export. Some studios use proxy rigs that drive the skeleton that gets into the game. Sometimes you don't see this by default. So make sure you check this skeleton. Game root, align, root, ground node, trajectory, magic box. It can have many names, but there is always a node that drives the character. It's like its parent. It's usually used to adjust character to the ground, drive collision, blends. Animation in this node is really important, and it can be the main cause of bugs. Avoid certain movements with it. Check it for smooth rotations. Check how many rotation degrees it has. So most places I've worked on, I've tried to find an automated solution, but in my experience, it's always better when it's hand animated. Disable all procedure animation. Ground adjust, weapon, feed IK, physics. By doing so step by step, you can narrow the cause of the problem and understand how these things work in top of your animations. Other things you can do is disable or lower the compression and detach the camera. My second tip is about layer animations. Games use layer animations for a lot of features like heat reactions, aim. Usually design requires this kind of animations because they are not meant to interrupt locomotion. These animations are not easiest to make pretty. But I think we should push the use of these animations to help storytelling and character development. Partial and additives are a great way of bringing character to life. You can modify a whole moveset with just an additive and transmit the feelings of that character at that particular time. You can also give characters their own actions, something they're interested they would do. Another great use of partial and additives is to integrate characters with the environment, like rain, vegetation, touching the environment. And finally, another thing you can use layer animations for is contextual outfit animations. Here you can see an example of a fight sequence with and without layer animations.
To the steps of Shambhala.
Jesus!
You want to hear insane? Nathan Drake raced a madman and his entire army to the steps of Shambhala.
And my last tip is real-time physics. Considering real-time physics in top of your animations whenever suitable. Use it as a way of enhancing your animations and not to replace it. Physics give a realistic feel to the animations when they are set up right. It allows for overlapping and secondary motion when animations have to be interrupted. It also provides a layer of realism. Animators should be involved when setting these physics up to make sure our animations look the best. And if you want to know more about this, check Michal Mack's talk on Thursday. Thank you.
I've got to go really quick. Hot mic. Okay. So my first tip is something I learned from my first animation director in Montreal. Comfort. I look for this when reviewing my animator's work. It isn't about how comfortable the chair is or if you need a hug. It's the understanding of body mechanics and readability. So, there we go. Dynamic poses can also be comfortable, but it is understanding the limits of a limb and that everything is connected that determine how far it can be pushed. What is driving the intention and the purpose of the movement? Are you crouching, reaching for something, or is it just a reaction? Unfortunately, this is something that's gotten a little lost in many animation reels that I've seen. So unless we add tons of constraints on our rigs to automate this, which can remove control, our rigs will allow this to happen. But be careful of extensive handle dragging to get bones into position. All too often, I see animations that you can tell have been animated exclusively this way. Break down your thought process. Animate through the bones, moving through the chain. Thinking of what is driving the action. If you are reaching for something, drive the joints towards the object. Don't just pull them. Use connecting bones such as the shoulder and torso. Be careful of isolating movements. Both of these poses get the head to the desired position, but the one on the right feels much more natural. Now, the reason for this is a comfortable pose will dissipate the position through multiple bones, even down to the arms and the hips providing balance. A good sense of weight distribution and balance will help bring a subtle quality that helps make your animation feel much more believable. Notice a slight lean before the first step and the subtle weight shift from back foot to front foot before the push. Check out the slight rotation on the hips and the transfer of weight over to the right foot. That provides the power to continue the push. When the hips move down, the head and shoulders remain stable. Remember, everything is connected. So understanding these mechanics allows you to break these rules when something extra is needed, such as hyperextending joints at a point of impact, but you should only use this for brief periods of time. This is backed up by Amy Drobeck-Jones's tip from last year's Tricks talk, so go check it out. So gameplay animation also needs to be readable as the action is supposed to be. This applies when manipulating mocap just as much as keyframing. The timing on these animations is almost identical, but the animation on the right benefits from an animator pushing almost every aspect whilst maintaining the integrity of the motion. For example, clear lines of action on attacks. The left arm through the shoulders to the right hand highlights the location of where the hit will land. Combine this with a more aggressive yank back and to the right, enhancing the pose, which adds more emphasis to key areas of the move. Finally, improve contacts, making a move much more dynamic and readable, proving that even with great mocap, can be vastly improved by a good animator. So my second tip is use slow motion. Now, not just because everything looks cool in slow motion, it also has its practical uses. I learned this when working on trailers for Assassin's Creed. The team wanted to capture everything in super slow motion, but it highlighted any tiny errors in the animation which might usually be covered. At that point in my career, I found it hard to see smaller issues during general playback. So scrubbing back and forth would highlight some of these errors, but wouldn't give a true representation of what it would look like in the trailers. So I started playing animation back at a quarter speed to emphasize the issues, and it actually makes it easier to fix, allowing me to spin around and see everything much, much clearer. So for extra clarity, I turn on frames and ticks. Yeah, I use 3ds Max, which let you scrub areas in super slow motion. I'd use this to highlight a point to my team that was hard to see in real time. Maybe the arc of a junk looks off, the weight shift maybe is too aggressive. Play your animation in super slow motion, and you'll be surprised at what you actually see. But be careful of extensive timing changes. This is a pass I will do more towards polish stage. So my third and final tip is, how does it feel? Gameplay animation is not just about looking good. I firmly believe that an animator's job is only half done when you export an animation. Working gameplay is rarely about the animation you're working on. More often than not, it's about the animation before and after. And these are just as important, giving much more context to the current move. With each animation, ask yourself these questions. How will it be perceived by the player? Does it read well? Does it look and feel good when interacting with it? Does the look match the purpose? Should I take control away from the player? If so, when do I get it back? When can I interrupt the animation, and does it feel right? And what is the most common animation before and after this one? Is it worth creating a custom transition? This will vastly improve how your animation feels. Block it out, export it, and get it how you think it will work in the game. Play it again. Give the controller to someone else. Watch how they play it. Always ask, how does it feel? Make adjustments, re-export, test, adjust, and repeat. This applies to any animation or system you can expect a player to interact with. Understand what your game designers actually want. Talk to them. Gameplay animation is a collaborative process. Find your natural rhythm and flow, and your game will feel much better for it. And as many of us said before, get it in the game. So that's tricks of the trade. Yeah. But wait. I know we've gone super over, but we have more awesomeness, and I'm going to go really quick. Okay, so we're just going to do a speed round. We're going to just give you a bunch of tips. This is my channel. Gwen talked about it before. It will give you loads of kind of animation goodness and everything there, so if you want more information, go check that out. Also, Pinterest is awesome. So the great thing about Pinterest, this came from Darren Randall, an animator of mine in Toronto, and he uses this for kind of inspiration and if he's trying to look to find something to do, and it's just a gold mine of reference. Anyway, so I'm going to pass over to JP, and he's going to go super quick. Is it broken? I think it's crashed. It's crashed. The music's playing, but it's crashed. So I think they're kicking us out. That's fine. Anyway, that's Tricks of the Trade. Thank you very much.